As a parent, I, like you, have gone to lots of workshops, sort of trying to figure things out and learn tips and strategies for how to do things better. And one of the most interesting things I've learned at these workshops I've gone to was one that I went to about brain development. And I learned from the speaker that the part of our brain that is responsible for experiencing emotion is fully developed by about the age of 2. So by about the age of 2, these little people can experience the whole range from happiness to sorrow to rage to surprise. But the part of our brain that's responsible for regulating and managing emotion, I learned, is not fully developed until we're in our 20s. And later for boys and for girls, closer toward the later 20s. So that explained a lot for me, not just from a parenting perspective, but about myself and my relationships with adults as well. And so the premise behind that is that as parents, we actually need to think about how we can coach our children to be able to identify what they're feeling, the emotions that they're feeling, and how to manage what they're feeling in appropriate ways. We're not born knowing how to do that. We need some help with that. And that is sort of the premise of Grushenka's books, and it's a concept that I found very helpful. So, you've been sitting and listening for a while. I'm actually going to get you to do something. And we're going to start by looking at ourselves. One of the things I've learned is that for me to be able to work with my daughter and other gifted children that I work with, it was actually kind of surprising for me to learn that I actually had to figure out some things about myself in order to be able to do that really effectively. So we're going to try it. So if you look into the first page of your handout, there's something called a parent profile of temperamental traits. And there are 4 traits here. In the book, she actually discusses 7 traits, but we're just going to focus on 4 this evening. And these 4, so you're going to rate yourself. Here, this is a little self-checklist. And this is just about you right now. So set your thoughts about your child aside. So the first one is persistence. And so you need to rate yourself from number 1 being you can really easily stop or let go of something that you're doing. You don't mind being constantly interrupted when you're on the telephone, for example. All the way up to number 5 is very high persistence. And that's if you find it very difficult to stop or let go of tasks that you're working on. Thank you, Jen. Passing out some pencils. It's kind of hoping that there would be some pens and pencils in people's purses. So the second one is sensitivity. And this asks you to think about how aware you are of the sensory input in your environment. Sight, sound, smells, textures, tastes. So if you're at number 1, you're that person who looks forward to the P&E every year, just can't get enough of that noise, excitement, smell of greasy, snack food, all those things. The third one is adaptability. And this has to do with how easily you can shift from one activity to another. A good example is how well you react to surprises. If somebody throwing a surprise birthday party for you is your worst nightmare, then you may be low on adaptability. And the last one is intensity, and this has to do with the strength of your emotional reactions. So that can range from very low intensity Other people describe you as calm. They see that image of calm coming from you. And high-intensity individuals are often easily triggered into very strong emotions and have trouble moving out of those very strong emotions. Okay. So when you're done with yourself, it's time to think about your child. Maybe just think of one of your children for this exercise if you have more than one. An interesting exercise you could do later is to do this for your partner or someone that you have a significant relationship with. It's very fun. But for now, let's think about our children and how you would place your children on that same scale. And the language here is a little bit different, targeted towards children. Are there any people here, I met a couple earlier who are teachers as well as parents? Teachers as well as parents? I myself have also found this very helpful in my work as a teacher. When I have students that I'm seeing exhibit some of these real intensities, I always remind myself to go back and look at my own profile and put it beside theirs. And when you're ready, the third page asks you to put these two side by side. So it asks you to look at persistence and place yourself and where you rated your child side by side. And that's kind of the critical piece.
Well, we won't kill each other.
You won't. You and your child, yes. Okay, I'm going to talk a little bit while you work through that as to the point of this exercise. So when we put these side by side, when I put myself side by side with my daughter on persistence, I see that she and I are both highly persistent. So this was illuminating for me because I was very focused on her persistence and how frustrating it was that she wouldn't stop doing something when it was time to move on and do something else. And when I realized that I am also very high on persistence, it started to make sense. Because if she and I have conflicting opinions about something, neither one of us is going to back down. Easily, we are both going to put both our feet down and dig in. Or if she wakes up with a plan in mind about what she is going to do on a particular day, and I have a different idea, we're both low on adaptability, my daughter and I. So neither of us easily wants to change what we have planned to accommodate somebody else. So we can run into challenges when we have traits that we share with our children in terms of intensity. But we can also run into difficulties if we're quite different. So I'll use my daughter as an example again. If I have lots of errands to do on my day off, and I want to move quickly from one place to another and just get things done and tick through them, but she's not low on adaptability. Our agendas are not going to match well. And I had to go through a few days like that with my daughter before I realized what was going on. Why it took us 6 hours to do the 3 short errands that I had on my list because she didn't want to move in each place. She didn't want to go along with my plan. One thing that you might notice as you're looking at this and you're thinking about your own gifted child is that gifted kids tend to be outliers. And so cognitively they're outliers, sort of at an extreme end of the spectrum. And so they may also be outliers in this emotional domain. So they might fall towards these extreme ends, the 5s or the 1s. Anybody observe that as you're thinking about your child? Not only are they intense, but they're number 5 intense. Yeah, that's pretty typical of gifted kids. And so when this author talks about kids being spirited, so I reread this book. And when I reread it, I just substituted gifted everywhere she said spirited, and it made perfect sense to me as a teacher and as a parent. The other thing you might notice is that your own profile may have changed over time. So you may be more adaptable now than you were as a younger person. I see lots of people nodding at this. You may be more able to tolerate and cope with sensory stimulation than you were when you were younger. So these are elements of temperament, but there's also an element of learned behavior here. And that's really important for us to realize, because if we can change over time, our kids can too. With our coaching and support, they can learn strategies that will help them to be able to manage these intensities. And so in closing, in your handout, on the next page, there's some little tidbits from her book called What Kids Need to Hear When. And this I found to be the most helpful part of the book, because it gave me things to say when I didn't know what to say. And at first it felt a little bit artificial, but I was won over by the response that I got from my daughter and kids that I worked with, because these are powerful things for them to hear, for a highly persistent child to hear. You just acknowledge. It's frustrating for you when you have to stop working before you're finished. To have someone ask the child, what are your plans for the day? And it's not that the child gets to run the day, but they get to say what they were thinking they'd like to happen that day. And then you can talk about maybe working it into the plans for everybody. My favorite one for highly sensitive kids to hear, I believe you. I believe you. I believe that that sock is driving you so crazy that we need to go back upstairs and change into something else before we go to school, even though it's making everybody late. I believe that you really can't function in this classroom until we turn off the fluorescent lights. And then there's some other good ones for adaptability and intensity too. But I use this as a cheat sheet. I actually went around with it in my purse for a while. Looking out when I was experiencing some of those intense interactions, and I was won over by how well it worked. So I wanted to share it with you. And that's it.
Okay, we actually have some time for questions, so what I'm going to do is ask